That was the Peace Corps way. Organization where people care and they let you know. They care about you, what you're doing, and how you're doing. And that feeling stays with me. Kids especially don't know what they want to do. I said, consider the Peace Corps. And they all know about the Peace Corps. I said, what can I do? I said, there's so many things you can do. And you can help. And you can serve your time. And when you get back, you can go back to school if you want to. You can take the education you've learned and share it and do something else. It's just a good thing.
Debbie Harding came down the hall with this pile of resumes, all women. And she said, this is what we've got to do. There were then 3 women Peace Corps directors out of, 65? And by the time we got through, there were 33 women directors, I believe. That was good. It is the people who make you appreciate the brotherhood, the sisterhood, of people in the world, and just stick with that.
It really drew me to the Peace Corps over time, because I was involved for about 17 years, was that it was a great leveler. It didn't matter if you came from, Esparto, California, off the farm in Michigan, or the Upper West Side. Everybody was the same. I feel very blessed. I feel very blessed that it started with the Peace Corps, and is going to probably end with back in Africa.
When you think back, what did you feel were some of the greatest sort of challenges for international service for women, in the early days? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, because one of our goals is to continue the legacy of women in Peace Corps. And in that conversation, that original conversation, we were talking about what the world was like in 1961 when Peace Corps was established. And the reality at that time was, if you were a woman and you wanted to do international anything, you had to marry a foreign service officer, or maybe you would have a year abroad, which usually meant Europe. But there weren't many opportunities for women. And Peace Corps served as an entree into the world of international development and diplomacy in a very significant way.
And emerge means to move out of the way of something and allow it to be coming into view, become more apparent, more important, more prominent. And it dawned on me that the emerging leaders that we have gotten to know through this award, they're not new leaders, they're not fledgling leaders, they're not inexperienced leaders. They are those who maybe just need to be given more space, more visibility, so that everything that they are currently doing can be seen and heard and recognized.
Difficult decision I made in my life to evacuate all Peace Corps volunteers around the world. For some, and in some countries, absolute surprise. Why? We want to stay, we can weather this. For other countries, it was already hours away from us not being able to get out. But we recognized that we needed to get out immediately. And you don't know when you make a decision like that. Here I have been part of Peace Corps for 55 years. It's my life. It's how I define myself. As for almost everyone who's part of this evening, it defines us in so many ways.
So, making the decision, because remember, we've always been about not just staying forever, it's helping people to help themselves. And when it was no longer particularly necessary or needed, we moved into Poland, and then we came out of Poland. We moved into Hungary, and we came out of Hungary. On the other hand, we're still in a number of the Eastern European and former Soviet Union countries.
And we know that in many parts of the world, girls and women are disproportionately impacted by climate change. And on the other hand, we know that educated girls and women are a most critical part of the solution to climate change. And the way we think of it is just as the world becomes more prosperous, safer, more peaceful when girls are educated, so does the world become greener when girls are educated. So we're really, really excited about this, because we know we can't leave half of our population away from solving these problems. And our survival depends on it. And that's a lot of that's a lot of power out there we can harness, and we want very much to do that. It's not only, as they say about girls' education, it's not only the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. Same thing when it comes to climate change and bringing girls into the conversation.
And so virtual service allowed me to return back to South Africa, where I served as a Peace Corps volunteer, and then to bring the new knowledge that I have after all of the years of working as a professional, and just all of the knowledge I gained as the world was growing. So one expression I use to describe virtual service is that we have the opportunity now to do better because we know better.
So the US government and other countries evacuated over 100,000 Afghans in the course of about 2 months. That was August, September. But then of that, about 75,000 came to the US rather directly. And we placed those people into US communities over the course of about 6 months, which is probably the fastest we've ever done it in history, in history period. And so a program that's existed since 1980, we put 75,000 people into US communities, 72,000 with full support.
This was so different. It was just so completely different. With social media, cell phones, TV interviews, as Larry mentioned, the Afghan, and being moved so quickly, the Afghans who ended up on the military bases had a hand back to Afghanistan. So they knew exactly what was going on back home. They knew what was happening to their relatives and friends and people they worked with. They were very aware. So they came with an enormous amount of stress and anxiety. That was a big part of who they were. And so they frequently would stop us and say, can you help me? Or let me tell you my story.
Raising awareness, sending money and supplies, engaging mass media, and directly assisting with transportation, housing, and money to survive. The Alliance has delivered $280,000 worth of trauma first aid supplies. Our new grant program, funded by sales of our Ukrainian cookbook, is delivering $20,000 to local humanitarian aid projects. And we've started a Uniting for Ukraine sponsorship initiative, connecting Ukrainians with sponsors so that they can find refuge in the United States.
Then there is hard travel conditions. Back then, in March, with the Russian troops being just outside of Kiev, there were consistent shelling and bombing of the highways, shooting the civilian vehicles, and so on and so forth. And then the next factor is uncertainty as to what is waiting ahead. Where do I live if I travel to Europe?
Back across my life, there are different female leaders that really inspire you in different ways. And I'll go to Sarah Gerwin, who works at the Peace Corps now, and she was a volunteer in Romania. And I've told her this story. We both stayed on an extra year. I worked for GE Capital, and she was working with one of the big consulting firms that was supporting this small bank that GE Capital had purchased and I was working at. And the GE Capital team came in and they had this strategy discussion. And I was just, little old Carol, right, in this meeting. And Sarah pulled me out afterwards and she said, you need to speak up. You know more than you think. And that has always stuck with me. And I credit her to this day for being that voice in the back of my head in those moments when you're kind of nervous and you're not sure if you lean into the moment or if you let it go by. And really learning to trust my gut in those moments and, trust myself in those moments has been really powerful.
The other thing I would say is when you are young, before you have other obligations, too many financial obligations or too many family obligations, that is the time when you can take risks. That's when you can try new things. It's not always going to work out, but it doesn't matter. You just try something else. I changed jobs every 2 years for probably the first 8 years of my career. And then I found something, my public health career, that I really, really loved. But that time, when you're still young and you still are relatively unencumbered by responsibility, that is such a gift because it's a very short period of your life. And so what I often say to people is, if you have an opportunity to have an adventure, to do some travel, to try a new career that you're not sure about, but you know, the stakes are not that high, just go for it. But above all, you know, make sure that it makes your heart sing as much as possible.
And I think in life, there's sort of a richness to having friends who are people with such values and adventure, senses of adventure and spirit. So I feel very grateful that throughout my life I've had friends like that. And that those friends also become a network. And so in terms of job opportunities or, well, let's talk about career steps. I think that always knowing somebody from Peace Corps made a great difference in the choices I made.